Hey, hi friends, welcome to today's video. So today we are going to discuss a very important concepts that we should follow to make our code more cleaner. Now many times we have heard about dependencies, we have heard about coupling, tight coupling and loose coupling and how we can make our code loose coupled. So let's first understand what is tight coupling. So in simple words, if I tell you that the tight coupling means that a class is dependent on another class directly. Now, if you see it in implementation terms, when you start writing the code, almost each class uses some other class, right? Like it's not like that when you are writing a application, you will be always using all the independent classes. There will be a point where one class will use other class, right? In that case, we always write tight couple code. Then how we can use the code loose coupled? So in the loose couple, what it means that still the class is dependent on another class, but instead of directly depending on that class, it is depending through some sort of protocol or some sort of interface. So that's how we can make the code a loose coupled. Okay, so in the loose couple we must pass dependency externally at the runtime instead of just hard coding no, directly inside the classes. So let's see this example which I have written down here. So what I have done, I have a Swift UI view which shows a list of users. I'm using this JSON placeholder response where I have name. So I'm just displaying the list of users and their names. Okay, and I have used Alamo file to actually make the API call, get the data, perform decoding, and show it in the list. And if you see, it's working perfectly. Even if I run it, it should show me the data correctly. But this code is tightly coupled. Now, when I say tightly coupled, then how it is tightly coupled? If you see that our view, which is the content view, is directly consuming the Alamo file. Okay, and then it's also directly consuming the model which I'm getting from the server. Okay, now if you see in the whole model, what I'm using right now, I'm just using the name. I'm not using any other thing. But if you see the array which I have created here, that contains the whole list of model. Okay, now when you think of like no removing the tight coupling, the first things comes that okay, in a list this looks like MVC or MV kind of architecture where the view is performing a lot of things. So what we should do, we should take a view model and separate this network call into view model to remove some dependencies directly into the view. Now let's do that and see that how much actually we are making the change. So okay, so now what I have done, I removed the complete code for my network call from view to view model. So now if I remove the Alamo file here, so there should not be any error in the content view because now my content view is not directly dependent on the Alamo file. And if you run the application, I should see the data perfectly. So now what we have achieved by doing this, that we removed one dependency, that is the dependency of your view to Alamo file, right? But your view is still depending on what? It's still depending on the object that is being coming from the response. Like see, it is taking the complete users, but still it's just need the name. So that is one dependency that it is still have. Okay, now let's come to the view model. Now what we did here, we removed the dependency from Alamo file from the view and we introduced that dependency to the view model. So it's just like that, you are removing the dependency from one place and introducing that dependency to the new place, but still our code is tightly coupled. Still if I comment this Alamo file, my view model will start giving me error that it is not identifying AF. One thing you should keep in mind, that whenever you use any third party, try to restrict it at one class or one interface, and that pattern basically is called Fakar design pattern, where so that in the future if you want to change it, it doesn't impact multiple classes. Okay, Now, this is the problem that we have got after bringing a view model, that we remove the dependency from the view, but still we have tight coupling into my view model. Now, what's the next step? That the next step can be that, okay, let's why we can't write a network manager class, and let's put this code into the network manager and then call the network manager from the view model. Okay, so now what I did, I removed the code from view model. So now if I delete this LMO file, so my view model will not have any error, and I moved the code to network manager. Okay, and now the network manager is doing the API call for me, and if I run it, I still don't have any error. But what we achieved by doing this, now if you see that, the one thing what we achieved is that now my view model is not dependent on LMO file. Okay, that means the view model is not tightly coupled with LMO file. But again, that does the problem get solved? The answer is still no. We removed the LMO file from here, but if you see that, I introduced a new class called network manager, which is again tightly dependent on the LMO file. And the definition what we read about the loose coupling, that instead of directly dependent, we should have the dependency through the interface or through the protocol. And again, if you see this method is very much generic, that I'm passing the URL here and then getting the response. What is the method type here is all hard coded. Means that if I have to write one more API call, I might need to copy and paste this thing again. Okay, that means first thing is that this code is not more kind of reusable, and it's still not solving the problem of tight coupling that we were trying to achieve. We are just making more and more classes, removing the coupling from one place but again introducing at another place. See that instead of having this method directly inside this network manager, what if I have a protocol here, for example protocol, and I'll call this as network manager delegate, and this protocol will have this method. Okay, I have done nothing much. I've just defined a protocol and have this method there. Okay, and now this class, which is network manager, I can call it as let's say LMO file network manager, and this class conforms to this delegate, and then we are implementing this method, right? So now the concrete class is what? The LMO file network manager is your concrete class. Okay, and this LMO file network manager should know about your LMO file. This network manager delegate is just a protocol which it's confirming. Now in your view model, what we are doing, we are creating this network manager object directly, but we don't have this network manager right now. So what I can do, I can create something like this, private let, I'll call it as network manager, and this will be of type what? Now instead of going to be a concrete type, I will make this of type of protocol. So this is going to be type this, and I'm going to introduce this as a dependency injection instead of directly hard coding it here. Let's say that if I have to make another API call, I again need to create another instance, right? And if you want to write a test cases for this get data method, it becomes difficult, or you cannot even write it, because whenever you are going to call this get data, it is actually going to call your actual network manager. So you cannot write the test cases for it. Now here I will be introducing this network manager as a dependency, which will be of type network manager delegate, and in this case I know that I have to introduce a dependency of LMO file network manager, so I can have a default value. You can now, I will just assign this network manager this object. Okay, so now I have the network manager ready, and now this network manager is going to call the get data. See, this thing is still same. The only thing is that the way we are calling has got changed. Okay. Now if you see my view model, it is not tightly dependent on this Almo file network manager. This is instead depending through this network manager delegate. Now how it is helping you? I'll give you one example. Let's say that tomorrow somebody comes and asks you, as I was telling that I don't want Elmo file. So, but no, as if he don't want Elmo file, but he don't want to disturb the whole implementation like that throughout the project. He just want to change a specific point. That means that he still want that some particular code should work on Elmo file, some particular code should work on URL session. In that case, what I will do, I'll create another class and then call it as URL session network manager. It will also conform to the same protocol, but in this case, what I'll use URL session. Now, instead of using Alamo file network manager, I'm going to use URL session network manager into my code. So let me just use it here and let me run the app again. And now you can see that we are getting the data perfectly. Now till now what we have achieved, the first thing is that my view model is not depending on Elmo file, my view is not depending on Elmo file. My view model is again not having any dependencies directly, like it is not tightly coupled with any of the classes. We are using interface to have loosely coupled. But there is one problem still, and what is that problem? That this response what we are getting from the server, this is still directly coupled with my view. Now what can be the issue with it? Let's say that right now what I'm using this JSON placeholder. Now here I have one more API which is called api.github.com/users. Now why I've used different API, because let's say that in your case also it can happen that when your development is going on and every time your model keeps changing. So if your model keeps changing, let's say that the object name got changed or something got changed, you have to again reflect that changes everywhere wherever you are using it in the view, right? But in this case, your view just need one thing, and that is the name. But what we are doing, we are passing the complete object to the view model. Now what we can do, instead of passing the complete object, we can pass the things that is required. Now it all depends on your use cases what is required. In my case, it just need a name, okay? Or for example, let's say that I need name and ID, maybe ID for any other thing. So name and ID is here also, and name and login, that is the name, and ID is here also. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another object. Let's say that struct, I'll call it as user display, okay? And this will have two property. One is your name, which is type of a string, and another thing is ID, which is type of integer. And this will conform to identifiable because we're going to use this in the list, okay? Now instead of having here a list of the response that I'm getting from the server, I'm going to have a list of user display, okay? Now the moment you write this, what is going to change in the view? Still it have view model.user, still have user.name. The only thing is that now I have removed the optional, so let me just make it optional again so that I don't need change anything changes here. So if you see that my view have no changes, okay? But the error comes here. Now here we have to actually manipulate it. So what I can do, I can write a function here, okay? And now if you run it, still I should see the same result. There is some error, ID is not optional, okay? So now let's make this ID also optional and let's run it again. and you see here that we are still getting the same result. Now how these things make things more better, let's say that instead of making this API call, now I'm going to make this API call. Okay. But now I cannot directly change it, because see, this function or this method was specifically returning me a response element, right? That means that I need to have one more method. Okay. But let's say that your concrete class will have, like your concrete class have LMO5 network manager or this URL session network manager. This should not have lot and lot of method, right? There should be some interface which is again regulating these things. So what I'm going to do, instead of the view model directly talking to the network manager, now why I'm telling that the view model talking to network manager is not a right thing. Let's say that, for example, that in your other API call, or not in other API call, let's say that in other screen you have to do the same method or do some similar sort of data. Then again you have to write the copy and paste the same code. Because you have to understand here one thing, that when you're using MVVM architecture, your view model is not a reusable entity. Then how can we reuse the code? Or what should be actually inside your view model? So the view model should just contain the logic that is required by your view. So what I can call is that in this case, I'm going to create one more class and I'll call it as a user repository, because finally we need something which is kind of a user data. So I'll call it as a user repo. And what will the use of this user repository? This class will actually get your user. Okay. And then this will have one more method which will give me the GitHub users. Okay. And GitHub users, this have different response. So let me just go and see what the struct is going to form. So let me just copy this. And where is my model? I created it into actually my view. It should not be here, but let me just put at the same place. I'll call this as GitHub model. Okay. So now in this case, this is returning you array of a GitHub model, and this is returning you array of response element. Okay. Now this class conforms to this delegate. Now we have to call this function 2 times and both the endpoints are different. Now I'm not going to in full detail that how you have to manage your endpoint. So for this demo purpose, I will be passing the endpoint from my repository class only. But in your actual project, you can manage it through again some sort of dependencies class, which will create the URL based on what environment you have selected, whether it's a dev, production, anything. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify this method a little bit, and let's try to make it a generic method. And I'll also take one more thing, that is a method type. Okay. Now method type. Now if you see here, if you write the method here, or if you go inside this git, there is a HTTP method. If you do this as a HTTP method, then what will happen, that this HTTP method has to come here also, right? And then this HTTP method has to go further in your repository model also. And the problem that will happen, that this HTTP method is a part of your Elmo file. So again, then you are bringing Elmo file dependency to other classes just to use this HTTP method. So just avoid that. If you have to do such cases, you can create your own class, and you can define, or you can create just on your struct, and you can define all these things for your own, and you can just pass that to the Elmo file. Okay. So In this example, I'm not going to take as HTTP method because both of my requests are GET. I will just take a URL, okay? And this URL will go in the method definition here also. And the same URL I will be passing here. Now this Elmo file network manager is now my generic to some extent that if I pass a URL and the method is GET, it will work. And the same thing I'll do for my URL session also. So okay, so now my generic classes are ready here. And now let's come back to the user repository. Now if you see this user repository is loosely coupled with the network manager because it is not having the direct dependency of network manager. We are using it through a interface. Okay, now we have changed some method definition here, so let me just delete it and write it again. So dot get data, and then we have to pass the URL here, and this is JSON placeholder. That means we have to pass this URL, and completion, we're getting the data but we are not doing anything here, so I'll directly passing this completion to back to this method. And same thing will get copied and pasted here, but this time we are going to use this API. Okay, now if you see that my repository class is ready, and this repository is reusable because let's say that if you have to call this user repository from some other screen also, like let's say that you want to get this user data in some other view, so now one view model can have a dependency of multiple repositories. It's not like that one view model can have just one repository. So this repository is your reusable component, not your view model. Okay, now let's go back to my view model, and here now I will not be introducing the dependency of network call here. So here I'll be using the repository, and let's thing remain unchanged, no error, nothing to change in your view, right? And let me, okay, now there's no get data, so actually there is a, we change the method, we call this JSON placeholder. So let me call it as JSON placeholder user. Okay, and this also I'll call it as get JSON placeholder. Okay, now it will give the error in the view, so let me change it here also. Now let me run it again. And if you see here, we are getting the data of the JSON placeholder without any problem, right? Now let's say that if you don't want the data from JSON placeholder, you want from the GitHub. So what I will do, I'll copy these two methods and paste it here. Now if I want to show the user from the GitHub instead of showing it from the JSON placeholder, you need to go here in your content view and call this method, sorry, not this, get GitHub user data. Now let it run it again. So there are some error. Okay, we don't have this, we have JSON users. So let it run it again. And you can see the list of users from the GitHub. Okay. So in this case, the only thing that we need to do is that the view here is actually calling this get GitHub data, or before that it called JSON placeholder data. So this also we can make it more generic, that instead of having calling or changing the implementation from your view, we can just call a function get data, and based on your condition you can determine that whether you need to call a GitHub or you can call JSON, so that your view should not be changed in the pace or in the. Okay, so that's all for today's video. Hope now you have understood that what is tight coupling and what is loose coupling, and how you can make your code less coupled through the uses of protocol and interface. And the advantage of using this, that it gives you better flexibility in writing the test cases. Now test cases is not something which I'm going to cover as a part of this video, but let's say that if you want to write the test cases for this view model, now instead of having some actual repository, you can have your mock repository classes, which instead of calling the actual network call, can call or read the data from your local JSON, and then you can perform all the test cases for your view model. Okay, so your code become more testable, more scalable, and more close to the clean principle of iOS, or clean principle of architecture. Okay, so thanks for watching this video, and if you have really enjoyed watching this video, then please do subscribe to the channel if you are new, and if you are already subscribed, then please do like, comment, and share the channel. Thanks for watching. Thank you.